And we're back. Hello, everyone. We have returned. We're going to be talking with some more excellent projects and some more excellent interviewers. We now have Olivia Bogs and Issa Shulman. We're very excited to hear about Visual Novel Anthology. So I will let them take it away.
Sure thing. I guess before we dive into some questions about your project, go ahead and introduce yourselves and your role on the project.
Dan Enriquez. I was one of the programmers and writers on one of the 3 games.
I'm Matt Selva. I was also one of the programmers and writers on one of the 3 games.
And I'm Julian Herman. I was the art director and character designer for all 3 games.
Nice. Yeah. I was curious, the breakdown of who handled what component of each game, since there were 3 separate ones. So it's really interesting to see how art was kind of shared between all 3 of them, and then programming was divided between them. So thanks for sharing. What inspired you to make 3 separate games rather than one larger one?
So the original idea for the MQP was to help Professor Moriarty test a new engine that he was going to be making. Unfortunately, that new engine never ended up happening, but the original intent was to make 3 test games so that he would have a lot of examples for the engine he was making. And once that part of the project didn't happen, we were still too far into the planning phase for our 3 separate games. So we just continued with that.
Gotcha.
And all 3 of them are quite different from each other. You kind of have this tongue-in-cheek fantasy visual novel. You have a time loop one, and then you kind of have a more somber and personal one about the grandpa. So what inspired those specific stories? And was there any common thread between them, or were you just drawn to those stories in particular?
I did another fantasy quest. That one I was kind of, I liked a lot of fantasy stuff like Lord of the Rings, but I also wanted to make something that wasn't really falling into the tropes of the genre, or sort of was, but sort of picking fun at it. So that's kind of where the idea for that came from.
The idea for the diary game, which is what I made, was when the project first started, we didn't know if we were going to have any artists on the team. So I came up with a way to tell a story in a visual novel format with as little art as possible. And that brought me to the idea of doing it in a book. And for our 3rd game, John isn't with us right now, but he was heavily inspired by some other visual novels that implemented similar time loop mechanics, such as Save the Date.
Yeah. Something that we noticed when we were going through the visual novels is that each of the stories use a different perspective. Fantasy Quest is kind of, you get an inside piece of Ziv's thoughts and inner monologue. Another Try is kind of all second person from your perspective as the player. And Grandpa's Diary is first person, where you are kind of becoming that character. What effect do you think the different perspectives in each of those novels had on the player experience?
I think with another Fantasy Quest, I think having sort of the insight into the internal monologue of the character certainly helps push the sort of the tongue-in-cheek satire aspect. So you can kind of see the characters, their reactions to sort of all the ridiculous things that are happening around them.
And I think the perspective with the diary just makes it easier to feel like you're reading this diary that exists rather than just being a person looking on from somewhere else.
It's interesting that you mentioned the art in Grandpa's Diary, because we were actually interested in what tools you used to create the artwork. We found it interesting and cool how you incorporated that real newspaper into Grandpa's Diary. We were wondering how original documents like that were sourced, and also how the art was created for the other ones.
So for the newspaper, I went on newspapers.com and scoured it for hours one day looking for an applicable picture, and I ended up finding that one. And it works perfectly with the narrative, and I was very happy with it.
Yeah, I liked how the names from that article were incorporated with the gameplay. I thought it was really clever. What was your workflow for incorporating audio into the visual novels? Both just general sound effects like the page flipping in Grandpa's Diary, for example, as well as in another fantasy quest, there's like ambient audio depending on what town you're in. So what was your process for kind of picking out audio clips and coordinating it with the narrative?
Yeah, so I know certainly for my game, I use sound effects from Freesound, so sort of like any free open source stuff.
Yeah, Freesound was our go-to for finding audio, and incorporating it into RenPy is very straightforward, so that process was pretty easy.
So it's interesting you mentioned that this was not, technically it wasn't your original project, but if you had another year to work on this anthology, would you add more stories to it? And what would they be?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. That'd definitely be something for skills.
Sorry, it's a little hard to hear from the mic. I don't want to talk over you, but I can't tell if you were still answering the question or not. The mic's a little faint.
Yeah, I think that's great. We definitely continue more, and I think some of us have plans to certainly iterate more on these existing novels and just sort of add some more polish and publish them.
Nice. Yeah, I could definitely see like a series of different mini visual novels to expand upon that. That's really interesting. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, some of the novels have gameplay in them, like in Another Fantasy Quest, you are able to fight Perseus and other acolytes. And we noticed that, we tried to beat Perseus very early on in the story, but the game was programmed to have him sort of insta-kill you and not allow yourself to keep healing and fully beat him too early in the story. So were there any other contingencies like that, balancing the gameplay with the narrative to make sure that the player could, still interact with the story, but not go out of the way of the intended plot?
Yeah, so I definitely intended sort of made the battles sort of supplementary to the narrative. I didn't really want them to be the main focus. So there's certainly, like you said, in those battles, there's contingencies to make sure the player can't lose there, as well as there's some additional things in later battles in the game. So yeah, I really wanted to kind of center the narrative.
Nice. Alrighty. And then I think we're running out of time here. So just to wrap things up, what were you most proud of on this project?
Sorry, do you mind just repeating that?
Yeah. What were you most proud of on this project?
I think personally, I was most proud of the way we were able to kind of collaborate. It was a great experience working with everybody on the team. And I'm really proud of what we were able to sort of make as a collective.
Yeah, and I'm proud of how we were able to use player feedback to shape our games. I know mine was heavily shaped by how players thought about different mechanics that I tried to implement.
I'm most proud of that, all of the great artwork that I managed to do for all the games, and also the experience of learning what an actual game pipeline would be and collaboration with other writers and artists.
Yeah, collaborating across 3 different games sounds like it was a little difficult, but a great learning experience because that's how game development is pretty much on any project. So I'm glad that you benefited from that. And it turned out great. I had a lot of fun playing through all of your novels. So thank you for sharing your projects with us and for taking the time to talk with us today.
You.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.